Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Beit Midrash. Good to see y'all here. Welcome back to some of you. I know some of you were out of town last week, out of the country last week. So good to have y'all back. Welcome back, and we missed you. So glad to be learning together again today. We're moving along. Chapter 14 of Judaism is About Love by Rabbi Shai Held, as we've been studying for I think about 16 weeks now. So if I did the math correctly. Um, as always, the theme of this class the theme of the chapter and the class is chosenness, and what does it mean to be chosen, and what are some of the consequences of chosenness. So as always, I'll start off with any opening thoughts, comments, questions, and then we'll slither our way through from there. Yes, Eileen.
Some of the chapter really said something to me because in my years of spending a lifetime with children, with teenagers especially, most of whom were not Jewish, they, as the chapter unfolded and the discussion of trying to get people to join another religion, I had that all the time. The littlest of students were sent out, I believe, the way they spoke, by their churches to change my opinion, not mine specifically, but the world's. So it wasn't even the adults all the time, as it was my students. And I taught in a secular school, did not, the kids knew I was Jewish at the end because I was the only one who was off on the high holy days and things of that nature. But I didn't go and say, I'm off for Rosh Hashanah. But they knew their families seek that out. And periodically, they came and told me things, about my life and where I was going in life, where we never send our students out to do this. So it really, I was very interested in a lot of the things that went on in this chapter.
Excellent.
I would just like to say, I find that absolutely appalling that they would send young people out to proselytize.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that appalling.
Well,
And I found it so refreshing that you don't proselytize. You don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And
I,
you're
I will.
chosen for a
I
good
will.
thing.
I will briefly add, if you find that appalling, um, read up on some of the bills that are going through the Alabama state legislature and start calling your legislators about them
Mm-hmm.
today, because they're voting on it probably next week. So if you find it appalling, start telling them that, because uh, not only are they continuing to do that, but they're also trying to legislate being able to do that. So, um,
I don't like that either.
no, neither do I.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
hopefully, I don't get canceled when this gets posted to YouTube. Um,
Okay, we're back to enforcing prayer in schools.
well,
Uh,
yeah.
And the Ten Commandments. I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a series of bills. We're not going to go too far down that rabbit hole. If you would like to go down the rabbit hole, send me an email after class and we can talk about it. But call them today. Um, Tomorrow might work too. I don't think they're voting until Wednesday, but still, ASAP. Um, Other things about the chapter, or things that stood out, or questions you have.
One and a class.
Yes, Esther.
Maybe I'm missing something here, but could you give us just a sort of a synopsis of what you think he's saying about chosenness? Because
Mm-hmm.
it was, you know, I I thought it was his weakest explanation of anything myself. Maybe I missed something. So I would
So
appreciate that.
here's kind of what I took away from his argument is I'll kind of phrase it as a analogy. Um, I chose Orly to be my wife. And as such, Orly and I have a special relationship with each other, and there are things I would do for Orly that I wouldn't do for anybody else. But just because I love Orly and I chose Orly for my wife does not mean I don't love you also, or I don't love anybody else. And that I have a different relationship with each of you. I have a different relationship with my friends. I have a different relationship with my family. But just because I chose her as my wife does not mean I don't love other people or I don't have a relationship with other people. It just means that's a special relationship between her and I. And I think that's what he's trying to argue in this chapter is that God chose the Jewish people for a special relationship. Why? God only knows. But, the same thing I could tell you lots of reasons why I love Orly, but I couldn't tell you exactly why of the 4 billion women on this planet, why, I felt she was the only one for me. I haven't met probably 3.9 billion of the people, so, but nonetheless, I chose her to be my wife. Why God chose us? Who knows? But God chose us nonetheless. But that doesn't mean God doesn't have a relationship with everyone else. It doesn't mean God. It just means that we have a particular relationship with God that is not shared with that God does not share with everyone else.
Well, and he uses the example of the bridegroom, or
Exactly.
the marriage metaphor.
He
I
did.
I understand that part. I guess what confuses me is in this book, sometimes we refer to God in terms of human relationships and the analogies to human relationships. And yet we also say, but God is not, So it really, again, this chapter sort of reinforced for me how much is man-made.
Exactly.
Perhaps.
I agree.
Um, yes, we have. I forgot who said it, and I think I've quoted it before, and I forgot then who said it too. That if cows had gods, they would be shaped. They would look like cows. And they'd probably be talking about how God gave us the grass, and they'd probably imagine their relationship with God in terms of cow relationships. Which is all fine, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The rabbis sometimes use the phrase that the Torah speaks in the language of people to say that sometimes we have to put things in our own language and our own perspective because that's how we can understand something that is otherwise incomprehensible. So we have to kind of frame it in a way that we can relate and understand because otherwise it becomes too overwhelming to try to make sense of any of it. So some of the structures, yes, are kind of human-made structures, but there's an additional point he's trying to make in addition to the basic part of chosenness, which is that the obligation of being chosen is not one of superiority or specialness, but it's a chosen for additional obligation. That by virtue of being chosen, we are held to a moral standard that we have to live up to, and that's more of the essence of what it means to be in relationship with God. Barbara, I saw your hand up.
Yeah.
He talks about this fairly early in the chapter where he's building off a quote from Rabbi Akiva, and he says about the difference between man and animals, in that we're chosen, humans, not we, are chosen in a different way. It's the second paragraph from the bottom. Only human beings and not other creatures are created in God's image, and only Israel, not other nations, is the chosen.
What
But
page were you on, Barbara?
Yeah.
Page 309.
Bottom of 309, yeah.
Bottom of 309.
Got it.
We've learned in other classes, and I would teach this as a geology professor, that no, I wouldn't teach it as a geology professor. That's beside the point. That God created everything. In creating things in his image, something that's always gotten me is you ask somebody, what does God look like? And they give you the old Lord, white beard, a very regal persona. But God could be a cow. God could be a rock. He created everything. So we don't really know what his image is, even though humans are theoretically created in God's image. So I think the idea that lands on humans, perhaps erroneously, is that because we think we're made in God's image, it gives us that sense of superiority, because people making these original interpretations simply didn't know. Do plants have feelings? Do plants or animals have a moral sense? That kind of thing. So, but he takes it back to Rabbi Akiva's writings. And I think that the idea of creation is always something that creates problems. And to add it to the chosenness is a stretch.
TK?
So one thing that helps me, or I say it helps me, it really kind of only occurred to me not too long ago that the wording of created in the image of God, we want to make that a visual thing, and I don't think it has to be. I think of the image of the Creator is of creating, and so we are made as creators, and as such we create meaning, we create beauty. Sometimes we create the opposite, but that's our nature. So image and nature, what we are, reflects what the creator. And I think that has to be, even if there is not a God, there is something, even if it's just an emergent state from the universe, and it would have to be that we would be like that. So, or I think I say that in my mind, it feels right.
Barbara Ayland, I think I saw your hand before.
Well, I was just going to add to what you said. Rabbi Held was talking about with being chosen. He also was very careful to make clear that there was nothing that we did to deserve it. So therefore, we shouldn't be cocky about it.
Yes. And in some ways, that's where, my metaphor falls apart a little bit. Is, Orly has done things over the years that made me fall in love with her in the first place. It wasn't just, I saw her on the street and said, hey, let's get married. So that is a little bit where that metaphor falls apart, but it still works kind of by and large in terms of what does it mean in terms of being chosen. But that, yes, he makes very clear we, as the Jewish people, didn't really do anything to earn it, and in fact, we've given God plenty of opportunities to disassociate, but nonetheless, God's love is great enough that God continues to choose us, and we continue to choose God as well. But that chosenness becomes a source of obligation and being held to a standard more than any kind of inherent superiority on our part. Stuart?
You're muted.
Okay.
You're muted, Stuart.
I'm off now. I'm out and about, so I didn't want to be on too much and ruin the discussion. But
I'm not hearing him. Are y'all hearing him?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. But I found this chapter
Yeah,
to be talking. You can't hear?
now I can. I don't know what happened.
Okay. But I found this chapter that he was talking to us as Jews and explaining to us Jews the concept of chosenness, etc. But the thing that was difficult for me is talking to my non-Jewish friends and trying to figure out how to not allow them to be jealous or indignant,
Right.
because I mean it is a significant issue. I mean it can raise the hackles up to a high level. So I was just interested in maybe, Rabbi, how you might plant a conversation, a Jew talking to a non-Jew about the concept of chosen.
I think some of it is, how do we define what it means to be chosen? And there's and he goes into extensive conversations of how Christians view this entire conversation very differently. But that chosenness doesn't mean superiority. It means relationship. And similar to what I said before, we choose who we are in relationship with, but choosing those individuals does not disqualify us from being in relationship with other people either. But that the terms of the relationship put some kind of obligation on us on how we act towards that other person in relationship. So God has put, through relationship with the Jewish people, God has put some level of obligation on us on who we are supposed to be, how we are supposed to act, what we are supposed to do. It's not because we're better, it's just because that's God chose. As I said earlier, for what reasons, only God knows. So I think that's an opening to a conversation, whereas I think for a lot of Christians, chosenness means something else. It means that through us we are saved, or through our chosenness we are saved. Whereas for Jews, it means through our chosenness we have a higher obligation of how we're supposed to act. So I think some of it gets lost in terms of language, that we're meaning different things when we're talking about it. Diane?
So every time I thought I understood what he was talking about chosenness, he said something that, threw it all up in the air again. So other people, he wrote that other people are chosen to be who they are. And the best part that I could get out of what it means to be chosen is that we're expected to be different. We have different obligations, and we're supposed to be a kingdom of priests. But what to you does being chosen actually mean other than that God chose us? We're supposed to be setting an example, so we have different rules. We circumcise our baby boys. Now most everyone does. I mean, what is it that we do um, that makes us different? Or are we not supposed to be different? We set an example and everybody follows us.
Um, Look, I think there's certainly, he talks about this somewhat. I'm trying to find exactly where, but that I think it's somewhere around 320. Um, he does talk about it in that the Hebrew word for that we usually translate as holiness, um, hekdesh or lahakdish, literally means to separate or to set apart or to make distinctive. Um, so you think of it, you kind of start drawing the lines from there. Is that why is Shabbat a holy day? Because Shabbat is supposed to be a day that is different than every other day. Um, I said this in a different class yesterday that on Shabbat you're supposed to dress differently. You're supposed to eat foods that you don't eat the rest of the week. You're even supposed to talk and think differently than you do the rest of the week. You're everything about Shabbat is it's holy because you're setting it apart as a different day than everything else. Similarly, we talk about God being holy. God is holy because God is somewhat separate and distinct from everything else in creation. We struggle with how do we define God? How do we understand God? What does God look like? We struggle with all this because God is distinct from the rest of creation. God is not. We're wrestling with this idea because God is different than everything else we can see with our um, with our eyes and our senses, the rest of our senses. We too are supposed to be different somewhat. Um, and that we are, I view it as a little bit that we are supposed to be, and I think he says this somewhere, I'd have to find it, but we're supposed to be somewhat countercultural. We're not supposed to agree with everything the dominant culture says. We're supposed to see things, think about things in a different way than other people do. And
What does that get
so,
us?
huh?
What's the benefit of being different from other people?
The benefit of being different from other people is that you further develop your relationship with God by doing so.
Okay.
I like there was a part where he talked about being different than other people, and he said, if your society's materialistic, be spiritual. If you're, I thought that was beautiful because it's sort of balancing whatever excesses there are, and there are always excesses. So it's sort of being a weight to a counterbalance.
So then you pick and choose those things that you should be different from. If someone
Now,
is a talented musician, they should be like other talented musicians, even if it requires that they are not totally observant in lighting Shabbat candles at 18 minutes before
I
sunset.
don't think it's a pick and choose. I think it's look, part of what Rabbi Held is trying to argue here is that Torah, he's not saying this directly, but that Torah is supposed to be an all consuming part of your life. It's not I'm going to enforce it here, but not here. that this isn't, you know, so again, to pull on the marriage metaphor, it's not like I can say, well, you know, I want these parts of being married, but I don't want these parts of being married. You know, you can wrestle with some of the parts of marriage that you don't like, but it doesn't mean you're not going to be married by it. So I think part of what he's trying, you don't get to choose where you enforce this. I think what he's saying is there's something inherent in our relationship with God that calls us to be different than other people. And I think for a long time we have tried to assume that if we were more like other people, that might help us. And I don't think that's actually helped us. And I think broadly, I think October 7th kind of shattered that illusion that it really doesn't matter what we do or what we say or what we believe. It, it's not, no matter how alike the dominant culture we try to become, we're never going to be fully accepted. At least I have heard that over the last 2.5 years, repeatedly. You can argue that point, by the way,
Yeah.
but it's becoming a more common theme in Jewish dialogue. Um, but I think what he's arguing to some extent is that's right. You're not going to be accepted because you're either going to have to choose the dominant culture or you're going to have to choose a relationship with God. And part of what God is commanding is to be a distinct people, which is fine. Accept your diversity, accept that you are unique, and accept that your choice of a life of Torah is also going to come with a sense of obligation and commitment that you're going to have to live, that you're going to have to live out in your own life. But as to your what do we get out of it comment, I'm thinking of Pirkei Avot, where there's the teaching of don't act like servants who are looking for a reward, act like servants who work with no expectation of reward. Lisa?
Um, so I've always liked the concept of a light unto the nations because to me that's always been motivational to sort of act in ways of righteousness. I'm not sure I get his argument though. I mean, I think he's trying to sort of thread the needle and again say keep like light into the nations, keep us from being seen negatively because we're a light into the nations. I mean, the way I understood it is he said that it doesn't mean light into the nations doesn't mean that like we missionize, that we like show people like the way to be. We're not trying to convince people to be like us. Instead, that we're like an example of goodness and loving kindness. But isn't that kind of showing people that that's the way to be? I mean, I know we're not trying to proselytize or like make them be like us in terms of how we practice our Judaism, but maybe we're trying to make people be like us in loving kindness and goodness and all of that. So
Yeah.
maybe we are trying to get people to be like us in that way.
So he doesn't spend a lot of time expounding on this idea. I think it was pretty much 323 and 324. So that's 1/20th of the entire chapter, give or take.
Right.
I think part of that point that he's trying to make was actually not entirely for the Jewish audience that's reading the book.
Okay.
I think part of his point is for the Christian audience reading the book, who read that phrase, or legoim, light unto the nations, in a particular way, which is broadly that, and he says, I'm not going to spend a lot of time because there's been a lot written about it, but that the light unto the nations means that you should go out and shed your light to the rest of the unfaithful nations and have them effectively see the light and convert. But what I think he's trying to argue is that's not really what Isaiah is trying to say, and that's not how Jews view that phrase either.
But I don't know, I've never heard like Christian people say it as though we're trying to convert them. I've always heard them.
No.
They're using it for themselves.
Correct.
They're saying God is telling the Jewish people who aren't doing it, so we've got to do it. The Christians are using the phrase for themselves to say, this is why we need to go tell the world about Jesus, because God wants a light unto the nations.
Yes. It's not that the Christians see us as being the light unto the nations. They see themselves as being the light. They have to spread that light throughout all the unfaithful nations.
But I've had evangelical people say to me, like, we love the Jews because God says you're a light unto the nations.
And the chosen people.
Yes. So what he's trying to argue is, one, he's trying to argue that that's not at all what Isaiah is trying to say. That's what Christians have interpreted as what Isaiah is trying to say, but it's not. You read through the context, that's not really what it is. It says at the top of 324 that the prophet's vision is about the restoration of Israel and the exaltation of its God. So that Isaiah is worried about what God will do, not what the people will do. But that ultimately, if you're looking at what people will do, yes, to some extent, what Jews are being called on to do by being quote unquote chosen is to be, as he says, to become a good and holy people, not to crisscross the world in search of converts. Our job is to set a moral example of what it means to be in relationship with God, and perhaps tied in with what I was saying with the countercultural part, to also push people to think about the world in a different way than they might otherwise think about it. And to shed light not by conversion, but by the way we think and the way we act in the world. And to show other people that just because that's the way you think, that's not the only way you have to think. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, and that's what I've always taken it to mean. Like that's a motivation for me to act in a godly way.
Yes, and I think more of what he was trying to accomplish in that subsection was I think he felt like he couldn't address the topic of chosenness without addressing that topic. But to basically say it doesn't actually mean what I think a lot of the Christian audience thinks it means.
Okay.
Yeah.
And trying to give a different perspective on what that phrase can mean for the Jewish people. Eileen?
Curiosity before we leave this portion of the chapter. When you have different groups come to visit the synagogue, has anyone ever talked in a group about the chosen people? I wonder how their interpretations.
Ever is a broad term, and I can't remember everybody I've talked to. But I have had the question, when people say, Jews are the chosen people, my general response is, chosen for what? Like, what does that mean? Because I do think, to some extent, the people who are saying it are defining what chosenness means differently than I think I would, and probably differently
Exactly.
than most of us in this room would.
Ex-
So um, I do think that this chapter has some, like, this chapter is important because it's trying to recontextualize what this can and should mean for us as Jews. But I think he's also trying to put a spotlight on the fact that the way we think about it as Jews is not necessarily the way that the non-Jewish world thinks about it. Barbara Ayland?
This is so interesting to me because, I grew up as a Reformed Jew and I've been a Reformed Jew my whole life, and Reformed Judaism really steers clear of this, totally. So to read in this chapter, like basically, yeah, God loves us the most. I mean, I know you said God loves other people. I mean, but you can't compare the person you're married to other people, right? You love Orly the most. And um, I'm just getting a lot of like Joseph and the coat of many color vibes, right? I mean, I think I can see why it's problematic. But on the other hand, the good news is we think you're good with God too. Like, we don't think you need to be us to be good with God. So, yeah, we think God loves us specially, and that makes us feel like we have a lot of work to do that's important to God. But we're not, we're not poo-pooing your relation with God too. We think that's real. So on the other hand, you have Christians who don't think they're chosen, fine, but they think we're wrong. So, we both have reason to be annoyed with the other, I guess. And I don't think his chapter did very, I mean, I have to say I only read half of it. That's why I still have 20 pages to go, but I don't feel like his chapter did anything to really help with that. I mean, I think it really is a
Dilemma.
you just see things differently, and I can see why it causes some strain.
So,
I read it.
two things to comment on. One, you said, Reform Judaism doesn't really do. Reform Judaism actually early on very blatantly rejected this concept altogether. So it's not really a part of Reform Judaism. It was actually outright rejected by Reform Judaism early on in their history. But as I'm thinking about it, I feel like he's simultaneously trying to do a couple of different. Like, there's one other piece I think he's trying to do. He's trying to say, on one hand, chosenness doesn't mean what the Christian thinks it means. But I think he's also trying to say doesn't really mean exactly what the Jews think it means either. And I'm trying to find it. He spends a decent amount of time, starting on 338, critiquing Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, Zichrono Livracha. And he spends a decent amount of time, like longer than he spends on Or Lagoyim by a multiple, of saying here's this Kaplan's interpretation, and here's Herberg's interpretation, and here's Weisgard's interpretation. And he's trying to say none of them are really getting the point. Like, I disagree with all of them. He's like, he's trying to push a particular interpretation and vision of what it means to be chosen that seems to, that he's saying that not the way that everybody else is thinking about it. So and the critiques of why chosenness is bad is, he's saying, he'd argue they're wrong. And part of it is, along with what you said, is I don't know if I would say I love Orly more than everybody else. I love my wife differently than everybody else. More is relative. And in some sense, assumes that there's a limited amount of love that we have to give. That, um, I have to love this person more and this person less because I only have so much to give. Um, I don't think, I'm thinking, I don't, and don't tell her I said this because it might start a fight. I don't know if I would say I love her more than everybody else, but I certainly love her differently than everybody else. And, similarly, like, I don't want to say I love her more than my children. I love her differently than my children. And I love my children differently from each other. And I love my children differently than I love you guys. Um, and I love, you guys differently than I love my best friend or my parents or my brothers. Um, so I think that's closer to what he's trying to argue is it's not a more than or a less than or a superior than or an inferior to. It's God loves everyone. God has a relationship with us, and that creates an expectation and a burden on us. Which, as part of the people, that's fine. That's part of our obligation as part of that covenant. But that doesn't mean that God, loves the Christians less or the Muslims less. It means God loves them differently.
And maybe a better analogy than spousal love is, and I've thought this before, is a first child. Mm-hmm. The way you love your first child, which is not more than your other children, but it is different, and the expectations tend to be higher, and the figuring it out together kind of thing. It's just a special relationship in the way that you don't know what you're doing, and they don't know what you're doing. But most parents realize they don't love their oldest child more than their youngest child. So that feels a little more equal. I think it's harder to explain with a spouse. I think it kind of the argument.
As the youngest child, I can say for certain that my parents love me most, but that's fine. Don't tell my brothers I said that either. Cindy? I said, while Cindy's unmuting, he does bring that parallel in and says, like, the Bible uses a marriage metaphor, but it also uses a parent-child, and that when God goes to Pharaoh, God says, Israel is my firstborn child. So yeah, like there is a sense of like, yes, I have this somewhat different relationship with them than I do others. Yes, Sydney.
I think for me, part of the problem is just the whole word chosen. That's a bad word in terms of aggrandizing ourselves and other people it has a negative connotation to other people, because as much as we talk about, it's for, we're chosen for all these other reasons, to be a light to the nation, this, that, and the other thing, there are Jews that think that we are better than other people. I mean, let's just put that out there. And I think that maybe we need a new PR spin on this. And I really like what you brought up at the bottom of 340, where directed us to, somehow I started reading this just now, Rabbi Obadiah Sforno. He hears God's words very differently. And yes, Israel will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. On some level, there is a choice here. We can understand chosenness in a way that actively belittles others, literally treats them as not, or through a lens that insists on the utter preciousness of all human beings. So maybe better first to say all human beings are precious. All are created in the image of God. There are some differences between us. And one of the differences is that we have this obligation to keep God's Torah. So I think it's a marketing thing.
100% agree with you. I don't know what a better word is, especially because we, have centuries of conversation around this word. But yes, I do think, particularly in English, there's a kind of this sense of, you choose the things you like better. Like, you're not going to choose the inferior, lesser, worse option. You're going to choose the thing you actually like better. I don't know what a better word would be, though, is the problem.
How about assigned? We were assigned.
Yeah.
And,
We were assigned the burden of Torah.
yes, and
It's supposed to be a joy.
Assigned the joy of Torah.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like, I don't think chosenness is a good word, or chosen is a good word.
There isn't another one.
It's hard with so many centuries of conversation to actually pick something else out that would gain enough traction. Though I'm happy to work on that with people and start spreading the news of, oh no, we're no longer chosen. We are now assigned.
But we're gonna have to add a lot of books. We're gonna have to add a lot of books.
I say Barbara Brandy may or may not, Professor Brandy may or may not agree with me, but you usually don't assign things as a sign of relationship, or as a like chosen has a sense of affection to it as well, that assigned doesn't quite have.
There's a
So we can brainstorm if we want, but I agree that it's I think that's part of what we're struggling with, is the fact that we're using a word that has a connotation that he's trying to change the connotation of. And he also does go into a lengthy conversation as well, 4 pages. That's 10% of the chapter, of why does God have to choose at all?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if he actually comes to a good answer or a good conclusion for that. But that, why does God have to choose? God could just not. Which again, he doesn't, I don't think he even quite considers that possibility, that God doesn't have to choose anyone. But I think the point is, if you're going to talk about covenant, which, the Torah very clearly does, that implies that there has to be some kind of choice in there as well. Barbara. Randy. You're muted.
Oh, been talking about changing the word chosen to assigned, instead of being the ones chosen, but we were the ones that were assigned the responsibility to follow the Torah. But we go back to the old idea. We're the ones that agreed to accept and follow the Torah. So that's a very different concept. It's not chosen. We agreed. Why don't you agree?
Well, God did choose to offer it to us, and we just chose to accept it. But I think Christians would actually take that same view, that through Jesus you have the choice. God chose to give God's only Son up for our sins. God made that choice. You have the choice whether you're going to accept that or not.
I found it very interesting last night listening to Tallarico talk about his acceptance of his win in the Democratic responsibility in Texas. And he's apparently a seminary grad and everything. And he kept referring to this guy, Jesus, as a barefoot rabbi. And I thought, what is his motivation for doing that? I don't know if that's a common reference, but well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe he wasn't referring to Jesus as that, but no, I think he was. And I thought, okay, he's trying to cross a bridge. Tallarico is trying to cross a bridge by doing that. But my question about God chose us is, were we the only people around he could talk to?
Well, I mean, there's an old midrash that God offered the Torah to other people first, and they all said no. But what's interesting about that midrash is, I don't know how familiar y'all are with the midrash, but God goes to different groups and offers them, and they say, "Well, what's inside?" And then God tells them what's inside, and they say, "Well, we can't accept it." But it's the fact that they can't accept it because of the things that God is telling them is in it. So there's a sense almost of God knows they can't accept it in some sense because God knows what's in the Torah. So the midrash is, we like to inflate that midrash a little bit, to kind of boost ourselves and say we didn't even ask what was inside of it. We just said, yeah, not save an ishma. We will do it, and then we will hear the terms of it and the conditions. It's kind of like putting the I agree button before the actual contract at the bottom. But the way the midrash reads, it's a little more complex because all of them use the Torah to reject the Torah. So I think it's a little less clear in that sense of whether or not they even would be able to abide by the Torah, even if they had decided to say yes. Esther?
We're looking at this chosenness from a belief system that God chose. If I look at it from my point of view, that man wrote this story because we were new peoples. We didn't know how to behave. And he saw some of the lawlessness and some of the hatred and some of the anger and he decided he was going to write a story that needed to capture people's attention. And I think Lisa said it. It's a great motivator to say you're chosen. Here, follow these rules. God chose you. And if I look at it from that point of view, that this was a way of giving people a guideline, sort of like, eat these vegetables. They're really tasty. And I'm going to make them in little star shapes so that you'll like them even more. And they were made especially just for you. It makes a little more sense to me than somehow all this other stuff. And it's not that I don't believe in God, but I think there's some, and this is something, I struggle with, this ultimate thing. Who wrote this Torah? Is it God inspired? Everything is God inspired. So leave it at that.
So, once upon a time, longer ago than I like to admit now, I had contemplated whether or not I was going to go get a PhD in some kind of Jewish studies thing, whether it was biblical studies or whatnot. And that's, your question is very much an academic biblical studies question of how we understand the Torah is very much based on historically how it developed. And you look at it from that perspective, yeah, it's a bunch of pre-Jews writing the Torah for pre-Jews. And yes, you read the Book of Kings, you can, academics will almost certainly tell you the two books of Kings were written by Judeans, not by members of the Northern Kingdom. How do we know that? Because it has virtually nothing good to say about anybody in the Northern Kingdom. And you can read the book of Judges and say, it's very clear the book of Judges has a polemic it's trying to push that there needs to be a monarchy, because it repeatedly says there was no king in Israel and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And you look at it from an academic perspective, you start to peel some of these layers and you start to understand what they were trying to do. And if you look at it from that perspective, the Greeks were writing their mythology to talk about how great the Greeks were. And the Romans were talking about how the foundation of Rome and how great the Romans are and how the Romans were chosen. Yeah, we're always going to talk about how we are the chosen ones. Like, that's the whole point of broadly, that's the whole point of a myth. The whole point of a myth is to bind us together as a people and we're always going to say we're the best out of that. Why did I not go into academics? Partially because reading these texts and trying to peel out the history of them, I realize is not all that spiritually fulfilling. When we try to analyze manuscripts and we try to compare manuscripts and we try to understand how did the Torah develop and what are the different layers and what does this mean? Well, we're taking something that's supposed to be literally Torah instruction, a guide for how to live a good life, and we're trying to break it down into a novel. And novels can still be life-changing, and novels can still have an effect on us. And there are books that I still think about on a regular basis that I've read, but they don't necessarily have the same spiritual impact on me either. So, yes, on an academic level, I 100% hear what you're saying. I think part of what I would like to push us to do is to say, let's put the academics aside for a moment and deal with what we actually have. And what we actually have, let's figure out what does this mean and what does this understand and how does this fit into my life and how I live my life moving forward. That's why I became a rabbi, not to analyze the documentary history, but to help us try to figure out, great, we have this documentary history, how can it influence the way we live? So yes, if you look at it from the perspective of humans wrote this and Israelites wrote this, so of course the Israelites are going to say they're the chosen ones because they're the ones writing it. That completely makes sense, and I academically not going to argue that point in the least. I think my challenge in response is knowing that, how does it help you live a better life?
I would just say we're arguing about this chosenness concept, and what it means. And I think the story is valid in and of itself, regardless of who wrote it. And I agree with you on that. And there are some certainly spiritual and motivating aspects of it, and some troubling aspects that we've all discussed in terms of chosenness. But in terms of his argument, in terms of God choosing us to have this special relationship, it's just hard to swallow that piece of it. It doesn't negate the messages of the Torah for me, ultimately.
So I hear you, though he'll say he says on the last page, the idea of election is fundamental to the Jewish tradition. So, we don't necessarily have to like it, but we do have to wrestle with it, and we have to wrestle. We can't exactly get rid of it because it's fundamental to our tradition. Like, if we take out the idea of chosenness, that also eliminates the idea of covenant, and once you eliminate the idea of covenant, that also eliminates the mitzvot, and once you eliminate the mitzvot, then what else is really left in Judaism? Like, you take out chosenness, you take out covenant, you take out mitzvot, what is really defining us as a nation of priests and a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So, I'm a little more hesitant to cut it out, even if it's troublesome. But I do think I think we have to wrestle with what does it actually mean then. If we're keeping it in, what does this actually mean? Cindy, you had your hand up before.
Time is short, and I don't want to belabor this, but I really like that story that you shared about yourself. And I'm finding as we're reading these books that we are doing the academics, and it is damaging and removing my spirituality. And I would just like to request moving forward, if you have any books that perhaps speak to what you just spoke about in terms of, the academics for our discussions are basically killing my Judaism rather than enhancing it.
So I'm curious why. Like, what are you noticing from it?
Because I'm very much like Esther in terms of I'm a very factual and rational kind of person, and unlike Esther, I'm still wrestling with the whole God idea. So just focusing on all these different points of view academically it's just killing me. It's just killing me. And I don't know if there's a book that can help, but enough about me. I just wanted to put that out there as we're coming to the end of this. As you said, let's think of other books. And I don't know what that book is, but if you can recommend something to help us to increase our spirituality, and rather than going down the same path with the very academic books.
You'd think God love would do that.
Well, it's almost like they're not academic, but they're almost a little bit anti-academic, was bringing out the academic in all of us. I think. I mean, I feel like I don't know. I think his descriptions of God are so accepting that it makes me go the other way. So maybe something that's more
question.
I don't know. Good luck, Rabbi.
I think the experience of Judaism and the emotionality of Judaism and the connection to other human beings is what is Judaism for me. And reading the Torah, it's motivating, and I actually feel motivated by some of these discussions. But I guess, Barbara, you're right. It just brings out the rational part, where you have to say, well, that doesn't have to be part of what I feel or how I want to behave or the importance of Judaism to me. And I know you have that too, Cindy, that you experience Judaism deeply and emotionally. So don't let this kill you.
I guess I'm being caught up in these academic, because I like the academic discussions, but I like discussing a novel too.
Right. And you can have both. I think we can have both. I think we can, kind of put God in his place, so to speak, and there is a place, and still love the experience of believing in this religion.
I'm not leaving Judaism.
I know. I'm still a Jew,
but I'm just saying I had the realization that this study is not taking me in the direction I want to go.
Yeah, I hear you.
And it could be it probably is how I am reading these books. And so maybe if we could just bring the discussions more into spirituality and faithfulness and that kind of thing, rather than, I don't know, this is, I mean, I didn't want to have I just wanted to just put this out there as a possibility for the future.
I think we'll just have to make this into a singing group or a meditation group. Reading a book, it's an intellectual pursuit.
So yeah, I'm always asking for the impossible. At least you're not married to me.
Ask my husband; he has the same experience.
So, as we're wrapping up, any concluding thoughts? Duly noted, Cindy.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
On page 337, well, and 336, talking about Hagar. I like this God's concern for Israel and God's care for non-Israel directly mirror one another. And I think that's something that Christians need to get in their brains if they don't have it already. It's chosenness is wonderful, but it's mirrored by God's love for everyone. And so that's, and I don't find that academic. I find that something to really ponder and be grateful for.
A fine note to end on.
Thank you. That is a lovely thought.
So I will leave it up to y'all before we wrap up. Do we want another week on this chapter or move on?
Move on.
I vote
One
for,
vote
Do
for
we?
move on.
I vote for move on.
I did too.
Okay.
I found it ping-ponging. I was one moment thinking this, one moment thinking that. I kind of.
Plus, it was long.
Well, it was long and there was a lot in it. Like, we didn't even get to the Sarah and Hagar part,
Right.
which was a fascinating section. So if you wanted one more week, happy to do one more week on it. If you guys are kind of want to move on, we got, I think, one longish chapter and a conclusion left to get to. So, yes, Barbara Brandy.
Well, Anne left us on a really nice note, and maybe I should just be quiet. But I love a fragment of a sentence. And it's near the end, and it says, "It is difficult to imagine a coherent Jewish theology." And I think that's why we have so many questions, because it's.
Well, that's a
Oh.
positive note.
Yeah, you kind of cut out the rest of the sentence. But,
I told you I did.
Yeah.
I told you I did. But if you're gonna, read this quickly, you can say, "Yeah, I agree with that."
The rest of the sentence is, "It is difficult to imagine a coherent Jewish theology that eliminates chosenness altogether."
They read that themselves. They're just.
That was very rabbinic of you, though, to try to cut off the sentence where you wanted to. The rabbis are known to do that on occasion. All right, so we'll move on next week, and that might help us kind of synthesize a lot of our conversation today. So chapter 15 for next week, and be well, everybody.
Thank you.
It was
Thank
not
you.
rabbinic.
Thanks,
It
y'all.
was not rabbinic of me to make it shorter than it was. That's a very